The fluorescent lights in the third-floor conference room at Toledo Steelworks buzzed like a swarm of restless hornets. James Larson, 58, sat at the polished mahogany table, his hands folded over a manila folder that held 15 years of his life. His ID badge, clipped to his faded navy polo, felt heavier than usual, its plastic edge digging into his chest. Across from him, Ryan Kessler, the new operations director, leaned back in a leather chair that used to belong to Mr. Ryan, 42, with a tailored suit and a slick-back haircut, looked like he'd stepped out of a corporate recruiting ad. His eyes flicked past James to the framed MBA diploma on the wall, a silent declaration of his authority. "Your methods are outdated, James," Ryan said, his voice clipped, practiced, inefficient. "We're moving to a cloud-based automation system, modern, streamlined, future-proof." He paused, letting the words hang like a guillotine. "Toledo Steelworks needs to compete in the 21st century." James's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He'd seen this coming, felt it in the air for weeks, like the static before a storm. 15 years as senior IT manager, keeping the factory's digital pulse steady. Through supply chain chaos in 2018 and a citywide blackout in 2020, and now this. A 20-minute meeting to erase it all. By the window, Tyler, a consultant from Nexus Innovations, barely looked up from his phone. Maybe 30, with gelled hair and a polo shirt branded with the Nexus logo, he tapped away, probably posting about his game-changing project on LinkedIn. James had tried talking to him during the 3-week system evaluation, tried explaining the custom integrations he'd built to sync the factory's aging production lines with its inventory systems, tried warning him about the quirks in the legacy software that kept 800 workers on schedule. Tyler had nodded, flashed a smile, and said, "We've handled dozens of factories. Standard stuff." Standard. The word still stung. Ryan slid a folder across the table, its edges crisp and official. "We've prepared a severance package. 2 months' salary, standard non-disclosure agreement. The security team will escort you to collect your personal items. We'll need your access card and credentials." James stared at the folder, his pulse thudding in his ears. 15 years. Not a single production line had gone down on his watch. Not when suppliers ghosted them during the tariff wars. Not when a lightning strike fried half the city's grid. Not even when budget cuts slashed his team to 3, and he'd worked 80-hour weeks to keep the factory humming. He'd rebuilt the inventory database after a corruption in 2019. Stayed up until dawn troubleshooting robotic welders when they glitched, and written manual overrides for machines older than his son. All invisible, all essential. He unclipped his badge and placed it on the table with a soft click. The photo on it showed a younger James, hair less gray, eyes less tired. "Master passwords are in the secure drive," he said, voice steady despite the heat rising in his chest. "All documented. Procedures, configs, everything." Ryan's lips curved into a smile, the first of the meeting. "Excellent. I'm glad you're being reasonable, James. Change is tough, but necessary." James glanced at Tyler, who was already stepping forward, eyeing the chair like a kid claiming a prize. The consultant hadn't asked a single question about the system's architecture during his evaluation, not about the custom patches James had coded to bridge incompatible platforms, not about the backup protocols that kicked in when cloud solutions failed during peak production, not about the delicate balance of keeping a 50-year-old factory competitive in a world obsessed with shiny new tech. "Is there something else?" Ryan asked, his tone edged with impatience. James's fingers twitched. He could tell them about the patch that kept the steel press scheduler from crashing every Tuesday, about the workaround for the inventory system's API that no vendor supported anymore, about the hidden server behind the maintenance panel, the one that saved their data when ransomware hit the Midwest. He could warn them that their standard cloud solution wouldn't handle the factory's quirks without months of retooling, but Ryan's smug diploma and Tyler's distracted thumbs told him they wouldn't listen. They hadn't listened for weeks. "No," James said. "Nothing else." He stood, the folder tucked under his arm, and followed the security guard, a kid named Mike, who'd once thanked him for fixing the payroll system before Christmas. They walked past the break room, where line workers sipped coffee and swapped stories about the night shift, past the production floor, where the rhythmic clang of steel presses echoed like a heartbeat, past the scheduling office, where James had spent a weekend in 2021 rebuilding a corrupted database so orders could ship on time. 15 years of quiet, relentless service, reduced to a cardboard box of family photos and a chipped coffee mug. In the parking lot, James slid into his '8 Ford F-150, the engine rumbling to life with a familiar growl. He set the box on the passenger seat next to a faded photo of Laura, his wife, taken before the cancer took her 8 years ago. He didn't look back as he pulled onto the cracked asphalt of Factory Row, the Toledo skyline smudged with factory smoke. They didn't want his expertise, they wanted his absence. James hadn't planned to end up at Toledo Steelworks. At 50, he'd been a private sector tech guy, bouncing between startups and Columbus until the 2008 recession hit like a sledgehammer. Laura's diagnosis came the same year, breast cancer, stage 3. Treatments drained their savings, and the factory job offered stability, decent pay, solid insurance, a chance to keep her alive. So he took it, trading server farms for steel presses, learning the factory's systems from scratch. Those first years, he worked under Mr. Thompson, the old operations director, a chain-smoking ex-foreman who'd started on the line in the 70s. "Fancy dashboards don't make steel, James," he'd growl, stubbing out a cigarette. "Reliability does." So James built reliable systems, redundant backups for when servers overheated, fail-safes for when vendors went bankrupt, manual overrides for when automation choked. Not pretty, but bulletproof. He skipped vacations to upgrade the production tracking software, missed his son Ethan's college graduation to handle an emergency server migration. Laura understood. "You're keeping people's jobs safe," she'd said, her voice weak but warm, before the cancer won. The factory became his life. The workers became his family. Maria in scheduling, who brought him tamales when he worked late. Carl in maintenance, who'd share a beer after fixing a busted conveyor. Even Rosie, the night shift janitor, who'd keep him company during overnight system updates, humming Motown tunes. They trusted him, relied on him, called him at 2 a.m. when a glitch stopped a press or scrambled an order, and he always answered. Things changed when Mr. Thompson retired last fall. The board hired Ryan Kessler from a logistics firm in Chicago, touting his transformative vision. Ryan's first move was ordering a productivity audit, a buzzword-heavy initiative that sent consultants crawling through the factory like roaches. James noticed the cracks immediately. Ryan skipped IT briefings, checking his smartwatch while James explained system redundancy. Tyler and his Nexus Innovations team, all matching polos and jargon, tossed around terms like digital transformation and cloud optimization. James tried to explain the factory's setup. 17 interconnected platforms, some commercial, some custom-built, all stitched together to keep production seamless. Tyler cut him off. "We've got this. It's all standard." The warning signs piled up. Charts in the conference room mapped the factory's systems but missed critical connections, like the link between the steel press scheduler and the shipping manifest. James's emails about security protocols got polite thank yous but no follow-up. One Friday he caught contractors measuring his office. "Just planning renovations," one muttered, avoiding his eyes. That night, James went home and dusted off his resume, a sinking feeling in his gut. Part of him couldn't believe they'd ditched the one person who knew how every gear in the factory's digital engine turned. He was wrong. The firing hit like a punch to the sternum. James sat in his living room, a half-eaten pizza on the coffee table, staring at a stack of job listings. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Texts from factory staff, people he'd worked with for years. "What's the backup process for the press scheduler?" asked Pete from IT. "Where's the config for the inventory API?" asked Lisa, the database admin. He didn't reply. The severance agreement was clear, no unauthorized assistance. He wasn't their employee anymore. The realization wasn't smug satisfaction. It was a cold, bitter weight. Toledo Steelworks systems weren't just software you could swap out like a spark plug. They were a living network, cultivated over 15 years. Custom interfaces to make incompatible vendor platforms talk, workarounds for outdated hardware that the budget couldn't replace, manual processes for when automation buckled under the strain of a 24/7 operation. James had documented it all. Hundreds of pages of specs, configs, emergency procedures, all filed on the secure drive. But documentation wasn't understanding. It wasn't instinct honed by sleepless nights and desperate fixes. It wasn't him. By Wednesday, his phone rang, Ryan's number. James let it go to voicemail. "James? We're having some issues with the inventory system. Just a quick question. Call me back." The message was calm, professional. James deleted it and poured another coffee. 3 more calls came that day, each voicemail tighter, more urgent. He deleted them all. That evening, Ms. Carter, the plant manager, called from her personal cell. "James, you hear what happened today? Line 3 went down for 4 hours, couldn't sync the press with the shipping manifest. We missed a major order deadline." Her voice was low, tense. "No one got fired, but Ryan's team is scrambling. They're talking about manual logs until it's fixed." James closed his eyes, picturing the chaos on the production floor. Workers idle, orders piling up, clients screaming. For 15 years, he'd been invisible when things ran smoothly. His all-nighters, his missed family dinners, his constant vigilance meant presses kept pounding, workers kept earning, and steel kept shipping. Now, the system was choking, and the factory was paying the price. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said carefully, "but I can't help. Not anymore." "Ryan's asking around for your number," Miss Carter said. "Tyler's team looks like they're drowning. You sure you're done with us?" James thought about the server tucked behind a false panel in the IT closet, the one he'd rigged as a last-ditch backup. About the paper logs in the fire safe, the ones he'd kept for emergencies. About the authentication keys that would expire in 10 days without manual renewal. He could fix it all in a day, but they'd made their choice. "I wish them luck," he said, and hung up. The next morning, James stood in his kitchen, staring at a business card he'd kept in a drawer for years. Sarah Mitchell, IT director at Great Lakes Manufacturing, a rival factory across town. She'd tried recruiting him twice, impressed by his reputation for keeping Toledo Steelworks running like clockwork. He'd always said no, loyal to the factory that had carried him through Laura's illness, loyal to the people who'd become his second family. Now, loyalty felt like a one-way street. He dialed Sarah's number. "James Larson," she said, her voice warm but surprised. "Didn't expect to hear from you. Everything okay at Steelworks?" "Not exactly," he said. "I'm looking for a change. You still have openings?" She laughed softly. "For you? Always. Can you start Monday?" By noon, he had an offer letter in his inbox. Senior IT strategist at Great Lakes, a 20% pay bump, and a promise to value his experience. He signed it without hesitation. Toledo Steelworks? Didn't want him. Someone else did. That afternoon, his phone buzzed with a text from Carl in maintenance. "Factory's a mess. Line 5's down now. Ryan's yelling at Tyler in the break room. You sure you're out?" James didn't reply, but he saved the message. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Experience wasn't just a resume bullet. It was the difference between a factory that thrived and one that stalled. He walked to his truck, the severance folder still on the passenger's seat. The Toledo sky was gray, heavy with the promise of rain. Somewhere in the factory, presses were silent, workers were waiting, and Ryan Kessler was learning what standard really meant. James turned the key, the engine roaring to life. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: they'd call again, and when they did, he'd be ready to decide what his expertise was worth. The Toledo sky was a bruised gray, the kind that promised rain but held off just to keep you guessing. James Larson stood in his driveway, the gravel crunching under his work boots, staring at the business card in his hand. Sarah Mitchell, IT Director, Great Lakes Manufacturing. The ink was faded, the edges creased from years in a drawer, but the number was still legible. He'd signed her offer letter yesterday, a lifeline after Toledo Steelworks had cut him loose like scrap metal. But the weight of his decision hadn't settled yet. Not the job, not the betrayal, not the factory he'd poured 15 years into. His phone buzzed in his pocket, another text from a coworker. He ignored it. Just like the voicemails piling up from Ryan Kessler. Let them figure it out. They wanted modernization. They'd get it. Inside, the house was quiet, too big for one person. Laura's absence lingered in the empty spaces. Her favorite armchair by the window, the kitchen table where they'd planned Ethan's future over coffee. James set the business card on the counter and opened his laptop. His resume glowed on the screen, a clinical summary of a life spent keeping things running. 15 years at Toledo Steelworks. Senior IT manager, zero downtime during the 2018 supply chain crisis, emergency recovery after the 2020 blackout, custom integrations for legacy systems, words that didn't capture the late nights, the missed anniversaries, the way he'd carried the factory through every storm. He'd updated it weeks ago, sensing the axe falling, but the firing still hit like a blindside tackle. The memory of that conference room burned. Ryan Kessler, 42, with his MBA and his polished arrogance, declaring James's methods outdated. Tyler, the Nexus Innovations consultant, thumbs flying over his phone, dismissing James's warnings about the factory's specialized setup. They hadn't listened when he explained the 17 interconnected platforms, some vendor-bought, some stitched together with his own code, that kept production humming. They hadn't cared about the incomplete system diagrams Tyler's team slapped on the conference room walls, missing critical links like the ones syncing the steel press scheduler to the shipping manifest. James had emailed them, detailed every quirk, every workaround, every risk. Polite thank yous came back, nothing more. He should have known then. They didn't want his expertise. They wanted his chair. His phone buzzed again. A text from Lisa, the database admin. James, where's the config for the inventory API? Line 2's stalled. He stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the reply button. For 15 years, he'd been the one they called when systems glitched, when presses froze, when orders hung in limbo. But the severance agreement was ironclad, no unauthorized assistance. He set the phone face down, the words of Ryan's last voicemail echoing. Just a quick question, James. Call me back. Quick. Like 15 years of institutional knowledge could be distilled into a phone call. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. James frowned, wiping his hands on his jeans. Through the peephole, he saw Maria from scheduling. Her Toledo Steelworks jacket zipped against the chill. He opened the door, and her expression, part worry, part defiance, hit him like a gust of factory air. "Maria, what are you doing here?" he asked, stepping aside as she barged in, clutching a thermos of coffee. "You're not answering your phone and the factory's falling apart," she said, setting the thermos on the counter with a thud. "Line 3 went down yesterday. 4 hours. We missed a shipment to Detroit, Ryan's screaming at Tyler, Tyler's screaming at us, and nobody knows what's what." James leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I can't help, they made that clear when they walked me out." Maria's eyes narrowed, her accent thickening with frustration. "They're idiots, James, you know that, but the rest of us? We're stuck in this mess. Carl's got workers sitting idle, Lisa's pulling her hair out over the database. You really gonna let Ryan's ego tank the place?" Her words stung because they were true. Toledo Steelworks wasn't just a job. It was Maria's tamales at midnight, Carl's beers after a long shift, Rosie's Motown humming through the server room. It was the 800 workers who'd trusted him to keep the presses pounding, the paychecks flowing, the city alive. Toledo wasn't Detroit, wasn't Cleveland, but it was theirs. A stubborn Rust Belt survivor that refused to rust, and James had been its digital backbone. "I signed an NDA," he said, voice low. "They fired me, Maria. I'm out." She shook her head, pulling a folded paper from her pocket. "Then explain this." She slapped it on the counter. A printout of an internal memo, Nexus Innovations letterhead. "Found it in the scheduling office. Ryan's pushing a full system overhaul by Q2. Nexus is taking over everything, and get this, they're promising the board a 30% cost cut. You know what that means." James scanned the memo, his pulse quickening. Nexus Innovations, proprietary platforms, cloud migration, performance bonuses for key stakeholders. Ryan's name was all over it, his signature bold and looping. The pieces clicked. This wasn't just about firing him. It was a corporate play, a takeover dressed up as progress. Nexus was notorious for locking factories into their systems, then jacking up fees once the old setups were gutted. James had seen it happen to a plant in Akron. Systems down for weeks, workers laid off, profits siphoned to consultants. "They're selling the factory's soul," he muttered, folding the memo, "and they think my systems are the problem." "Your systems?" Maria snorted. "They're the only reason we've stayed afloat. You think Ryan knows how to handle a press scheduler crash, or Tyler? That kid's probably Googling legacy software right now." James almost smiled. but the weight of it all pressed down. He'd built those systems from nothing, learned the factory's rhythms like a second language. When Mr. Thompson ran the show, reliability was king. "Keep the lines moving, James," he'd say, clapping him on the shoulder. "That's what keeps Toledo breathing." So James had. He'd missed Ethan's high school plays, Laura's last good summer, his own health, all to keep the factory alive. And now Ryan, with his buzzwords and bonuses, was tearing it apart. "I've got a job lined up," he said, the words tasting bitter. "Great Lakes Manufacturing, start Monday." Maria's face fell, but she nodded. "Good for you. But James, this ain't just about you, it's about us. The floor, the people who count on you." He looked away, Laura's photo on the counter catching his eye. She'd believed in the factory, believed in him. "You're keeping people's jobs safe," she'd said, even as the cancer stole her strength. He wanted to help Maria, to fix the mess Ryan had made. But they'd drawn a line when they took his badge. He wasn't crossing it. "Tell Carl and Lisa I'm sorry," he said. But Ryan wanted a clean break. He got it. Maria sighed, grabbing her thermos. "When it all crashes, don't say I didn't warn you." She paused at the door. "You're better than this, James. Always were." The door clicked shut and the silence returned, heavier now. James sank into a chair, the memo crumpled in his fist. His phone buzzed again, another voicemail from Ryan. He deleted it without listening. By Monday, the local news was buzzing. Channel 13 ran a segment outside Toledo Steelworks, a reporter in a windbreaker gesturing at the factory's smokestacks. "System failures have plagued Toledo Steelworks this week, with multiple production lines offline," she said, her voice clipped and urgent. "Sources confirm the disruptions follow a recent IT overhaul, raising concerns about job security for the plant's 800 workers." James watched from his living room, a coffee mug cooling in his hand. The camera panned to idle workers in hard hats, their faces tight with worry. He recognized Pete from IT, head down, avoiding the lens. The reporter mentioned emergency manual processes to keep orders moving, but James knew better. Manual logs couldn't handle the volume of a factory like Steelworks. Deadlines would slip, clients would bail, and the board would start pointing fingers. His phone rang. Miss Carter, the plant manager. Formerly Dr. Patel in the original story, now a tough-as-nails Toledo native who'd climb from the shop floor to management. "James, it's a circus here," she said, her voice hoarse. "Line 5's down now. Inventory's a mess. We lost a $2 million 0 cents order to Chicago this morning. Ryan's telling the board it's temporary, but the floor's panicking." James gripped the phone, picturing the chaos. Line 5 was the heart of the factory, churning out steel for automotive clients. A shutdown meant missed quotas, angry buyers, and workers sent home without pay. "What do you want me to do, Ellen?" he asked, using her first name. "They fired me. I'm not on the payroll." "I know," she said, "but Ryan's asking for your number. Tyler's team is drowning. They can't even find the backup logs for the press scheduler. You know what happens if we don't fix this? Layoffs, maybe worse." The word layoffs hit like a hammer. Toledo had seen too many factories shutter, too many families broken by empty plants and broken promises. James had joined Steelworks to avoid that fate, to give Laura stability, to give Ethan a future. He'd kept the factory alive through every crisis, and now it was crumbling because Ryan wanted a bonus and Tyler wanted a LinkedIn badge. "I can't," he said, his voice tight. "I start at Great Lakes tomorrow. They're counting on me." Ellen paused, the hum of the factory floor faint in the background. "Great Lakes, huh? Good for you. But James, this is bigger than Ryan's screw-up. It's about the people here. Maria, Carl, Lisa. You're the only one who knows how it all fits together." He closed his eyes, the weight of her words pressing down. He thought of the server behind the IT closet panel, the one he'd rigged as a failover. The paper logs in the fire safe, untouched since he'd last updated them. The authentication keys, set to expire in 8 days without his intervention. He could fix it. He could walk in, plug the holes, save the factory. But why should he? They'd tossed him out, handed his life's work to a kid who didn't know a mainframe from a microwave. "I'm sorry, Ellen," he said. "I wish you luck." He hung up before she could argue. his chest tight. The TV droned on, the reporter now interviewing a union rep about management missteps. James muted it and walked to the window, the Toledo skyline smudged with factory smoke. He wasn't vengeful, wasn't cruel, but he was tired. Tired of being invisible, tired of carrying the weight for people who didn't care. Tuesday morning, James was halfway through his second coffee when the doorbell rang. He opened it to find Ryan Kessler on his porch, tie askew, eyes bloodshot, a far cry from the polished executive who'd fired him. Ryan forced a smile, clutching a briefcase like a shield. "James, thanks for seeing me. Can we talk?" James hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. They sat at the kitchen table, the memo from Maria still crumpled on the counter. James poured Ryan a coffee, more out of habit than hospitality, and waited. Ryan cleared his throat, his fingers tapping the briefcase. "We've hit some complications with the system transition. Tyler's team is working around the clock, but your architecture, it's more complex than we anticipated." James sipped his coffee, letting the silence stretch. Complex? That was one way to describe 15 years of custom code, workarounds, and instinct. "I documented everything," he said, his tone flat. "Specs, configs, procedures, it's all on the secure drive." Yes, the documentation's there," Ryan said, leaning forward. "But some of these integrations, the press scheduler, the inventory API, they're unique. We lost line 4 for 6 hours yesterday. Shipping's backed up. We're facing penalties from clients." James's jaw tightened. Penalties meant lost revenue, which meant budget cuts, which meant jobs. He thought of Maria's tamales, Carl's kids, Lisa's mortgage. But he also thought of Ryan's smug, outdated jab, Tyler's dismissive smirk. "Sounds like the clouds working out," he said, his voice edged with ice. Ryan's face flushed. "Look, James, I'm not here to play games. I'm offering you a 6-month contract as implementation consultant. Double your old salary, help us get this transition right." The offer was a slap dressed up as generosity. They'd fired him, trashed his systems, and now wanted him to clean up their mess. Double his salary to train Tyler's team, to hand over the keys to his life's work. James set his mug down, the ceramic clinking against the counter. "I've already accepted a position. Great Lakes Manufacturing, start tomorrow." Ryan's eyes widened, his coffee mug freezing halfway to his lips. "Great Lakes? They're our direct competitor." "Yup," James said, leaning back, "and they value what I bring to the table." Ryan's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic. "James, be reasonable. You built these systems. You know them better than anyone. We're talking about the factory's future, jobs, the community." Word community twisted in James's gut. For 15 years, he'd put Toledo Steelworks above everything, his family, his health, his dreams. He'd stayed up nights to keep the lines moving, to keep Toledo breathing, and Ryan had the gall to lecture him about community? "I tried to warn you," James said, his voice low, controlled. "I told you the cloud wouldn't handle our setup without months of planning. I sent emails, I offered to help. You didn't listen." Ryan's face hardened. "The board demanded progress. Modernization is non-negotiable." "Then you should have done it right," James snapped, his calm cracking. "Instead, you sold out to Nexus for a bonus. Don't talk to me about community when you're gutting the factory for a paycheck." Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. He stood, grabbing his briefcase. "Your severance includes an NDA. You can't share proprietary info with Great Lakes." James smiled, thin and sharp. "My lawyer checked, no non-compete. I'm free to work where I want, and I don't need to share anything. Your mess is public now." Ryan's eyes darkened, but he didn't argue. He strode to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "This isn't over, James. You're making a mistake." "Good luck with your modernization," James said, echoing Maria's warning. The door slammed shut, and the house fell silent again. By Thursday, the news had escalated. Channel 13's evening broadcast led with "Toledo Steel Works," the reporter's tone grim. System failures continue to cripple Toledo Steel Works, with production down 40% this week. The factory has resorted to manual logs, but insiders report growing concerns about long-term viability. The camera cut to a worker, face shadowed, voice distorted. Management pushed this new system without testing it. Now we're paying the price. James watched from his couch, a knot in his stomach. He recognized the voice, Pete, the IT guy who'd texted him days ago. The report mentioned significant financial losses and board pressure for answers. James knew what that meant. Ryan was scrambling, Tyler was floundering, and the workers were caught in the crossfire. His phone rang. An unknown number, but the area code was local. He answered, cautious. James Larson. Mr. Larson, this is Elaine Ellison, board member at Toledo Steelworks. Her voice was steady, professional, but there was an edge to it. I'm calling about the current situation at the factory. I understand you were recently let go. James sat up, his pulse quickening. Elaine Ellison was a Toledo native, a former union lawyer who'd joined the board to protect worker interests. He'd met her once at a company picnic when she'd thanked him for fixing the payroll system. What do you want, Ms. Ellison? To be blunt, we were misled. Misled? She said. The board approved Ryan Kessler's IT overhaul based on flawed data. He claimed your systems were obsolete, non-compliant, at risk of failure. Nexus Innovations backed him up with performance metrics that, frankly, don't hold up. We've since learned your systems had 99.9% uptime and passed every audit. James's grip tightened on the phone. I could have told you that. Did tell you. Nobody listened. I know, she said, and that's on us. Ryan's deal with Nexus wasn't just about modernization. It was a long-term contract to lock us into their platform. Significant upfront savings, plus a bonus for Ryan if he delivered. The board didn't see the full picture until now. The memo, Maria's warning. It all clicked. Ryan hadn't just fired James to clear a path. He'd sold the factory's future to Nexus, gambling 800 jobs for a payout. How bad is it? James asked, dreading the answer. Elaine's pause was heavy. We've lost 3 major clients this week. Production's at half capacity, the state's looking into labor violations because of the downtime, and Ryan's still insisting Nexus can fix it. James closed his eyes, picturing the factory floor. Presses silent, workers sent home, Toledo's heartbeat slowing. He hadn't wanted this. He'd wanted respect, not ruin. Why are you telling me this? Because we're holding an emergency board meeting tomorrow, she said. I'd like you to attend, share your perspective, no obligation, but we need to hear from the man who kept this factory running for 15 years. He hesitated. Great Lakes was expecting him Monday. He had a new life waiting, a chance to start over. But Toledo Steelworks was in his blood, in the calluses on his hands, in the memory of Laura's pride. And Ryan's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a betrayal of the city, the workers, the legacy. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I ask, Elaine replied. And James, whatever you decide, I'm sorry we failed you. She hung up and James sat there, the TV muted, the factory's smokestacks flickering on the screen. He thought of Laura, of Ethan, of the workers who'd called him family. He thought of Ryan's smug diploma, Tyler's useless charts, Nexus's greedy playbook, and he thought of the systems he'd built, the ones they'd called outdated but were now the only thing that could save the factory. Friday morning, James arrived at Toledo Steelworks 15 minutes early, just as he had for every meeting in 15 years. The boardroom smelled of coffee and tension, the same mahogany table where Ryan had fired him now surrounded by grim-faced board members. Elaine Ellison greeted him with a handshake, her eyes warm but weary. Thank you, James. I wasn't sure you'd come. Neither was I, he admitted, taking a seat. The room filled quickly. Plant managers, union reps, department heads. Maria caught his eye from across the table, giving a small nod. Carl was there too, his hard hat tucked under his arm, his face lined with worry. Ryan arrived last, his suit rumpled, his confidence frayed. He froze when he saw James, his briefcase slipping slightly in his grip. Tyler trailed behind, his Nexus polo wrinkled, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. Elaine called the meeting to order, her voice cutting through the murmurs. We're here to address the system failures and reassess our contract with Nexus Innovations. Mr. Larson has agreed to share his perspective. All eyes turned to James. For 15 years he'd worked in the shadows, fixing problems before they became crises. Now he was center stage, the factory's fate in his words. He opened his laptop, connecting it to the projector. A diagram appeared, his diagram, the one he'd built over years, mapping every system, every integration, every fail-safe. For 15 years, I kept this factory running, he began, his voice steady but laced with steel. Every line, every order, every job depended on systems I built to fit Toledo Steelworks. Not generic, not standard, custom. Because this factory isn't like any other. He clicked to a slide showing uptime stats. 99.9% last year, 99.8% the year before. These systems weren't outdated. They were bulletproof, passed every audit, survived every crisis, and they're documented, hundreds of pages, all on the secure drive. The problem isn't the systems, it's Nexus. Ryan shifted, his jaw tight. The compatibility issues are temporary. Nexus has implemented their platform in dozens of factories. James pulled up a new slide, a comparison he'd spent all night building. These are the factories Nexus claims as successes. Notice anything? He pointed to the list. All new builds, greenfield plants with no legacy systems. Nexus works when you start from scratch. But retrofitting their platform onto a 50-year-old factory like ours? It's a disaster, and they knew it. He clicked again, showing Nexus's own technical specs highlighted in red. Their system can't handle our press scheduler or our inventory API. I flagged this in my emails. Nobody responded. Elaine leaned forward, her eyes on Ryan. Did you know about these incompatibilities when you recommended Nexus? Ryan's hands clenched. The assessment showed minimal transition risks. Nexus assured us. The assessment you rigged, James interrupted, pulling up an email from Lisa, forwarded from a whistleblower. You told staff to highlight vulnerabilities and bury stability metrics. You lied to the board to secure your bonus. The room went silent, the air thick with shock. Maria's eyes blazed, Carl's fists clenched, and Elaine's face hardened. James pressed on, his voice rising. Toledo Steelworks can't run on Nexus's platform. Not without years of retooling. You're not just risking downtime, you're risking jobs, clients, this city's future. Ryan stood, his voice shaking. You're a disgruntled ex-employee trying to sabotage progress. The board can't seriously consider this. Miss Carter spoke up, her voice like gravel. We've lost $5 million, 0 cents in orders this week. 3 lines are down. Workers are on half shifts. That's not sabotage, Ryan. That's your failure. The board deliberated for 20 minutes, their voices muffled behind closed doors. When they returned, Elaine's expression was resolute. The Nexus contract is terminated effective immediately. We're restoring Mr. Larson's systems. And we'd like to offer you a new role, James. Chief Information Officer. James glanced at Ryan, now slumped by the door, his briefcase forgotten. Tyler was gone, slipped out like a ghost. The offer hung in the air, a chance to reclaim his place, to rebuild what he'd lost. But it wasn't just about him. It was about Maria, Carl, Lisa, the 800 workers who'd trusted him. It was about Toledo. I'll consider it, he said, packing his laptop, but this time we do it right. 3 weeks later, James walked through Toledo Steelworks main gate, a new ID badge clipped to his jacket, James Larson, Chief Information Officer. The turnaround had been brutal. Nexus had mangled key databases before leaving, and James's new team, veterans like Lisa and fresh hires from local tech schools, had worked 18-hour days to restore them. They'd rebuilt the press scheduler, recovered the inventory API, and dug out the backup server from the IT closet. Ryan was gone, pursuing other opportunities, per the board's terse memo. James hadn't asked for his head, but he didn't mourn his exit. He stopped by the scheduling office where Maria grinned, her monitor showing real-time production data. Lines are back to 90%, James. You're a miracle worker. Just doing my job, he said. But her smile warmed him. On the factory floor, Carl clapped him on the back, the presses thundering behind him. Knew you'd come through, man. Night and day. In the boardroom, Elaine, now interim director, nodded as James presented his 5-year plan. A careful, worker-first modernization that built on what worked, not what sparkled. Real progress, he said, doesn't burn down the house to build a new one. The board approved it unanimously. That night, James sat on his porch, a beer in hand, the Toledo skyline glowing under the stars. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Mitchell at Great Lakes. "Heard you stayed at Steelworks. Toledo's lucky to have you." He smiled, typing back, "Thanks. Had to finish what I started." He picked up his new badge, the title glinting, Chief Information Officer. Not the invisible fix-it guy anymore. The man who'd saved the factory and maybe the city from a corporate con. The fight wasn't over. Modernization loomed, and Nexus's shadow lingered. But for now, Toledo Steelworks was breathing again, and James was home.